Hey, good evening, everybody. CMC, aka Corey from the Widiots, here with a little bit of a pre-Thanksgiving football story. Now, this is actually covering this isn't like current football talk or anything like that. This is actually a historical story that just kind of shows how wild things were back in the old days. And in this case, we're going back to the 1925 NFL season for this. This is back when many smaller level teams, I guess you could say, or defunct teams were still playing. In this case, it's the original Cardinals, the ones from Chicago, the ones that canonically play in Arizona these days. Is about a little scandal they got themselves into. Now, one thing I'm going to point out before I kind of get into the story here is that back in the 20s, to determine the NFL champion, it was based on your winning record and your win percentage. So whoever had the best record and best winning percentage was declared the champion, which is a terrible format, and thankfully they squashed that and changed it into a championship game in the 30s. And I'm going to explain here with this story why the winning percentage and winning record not the best way to make an NFL champion. It's fine for high school conference play, not so much for pro football. So let's get on with it. So this is the 1925 Chicago Cardinals Milwaukee Badgers scandal. This is from our friends over at Wikipedia, which multiple friends on there because multiple people can write articles. So the 1925 Chicago Cardinals Milwaukee Badgers scandal was a scandal centered on a 1925 game between the Chicago Cardinals and the Milwaukee Badgers of the National Football League. Excuse me. The scandal involved a Chicago player, Art Foles, hiring a group of high school football players to play for the Milwaukee Badgers against the Cardinals. This would ensure an inferior opponent for Chicago. The game was used to help prop up their win-loss percentage and as a chance of wresting the 1925 championship away from the first-place Pottsville Maroons. Now, a lot of people need to realize Pottsville Maroons were an early power in the NFL. I mean, the Packers didn't really get running and really good until the late 20s. The Cardinals were a pretty decent team throughout the course of the 20s and 30s. The Bears were starting to kind of pick up some steam. So, I mean, the current powers in the NFL were just kind of getting started. So, the scandal itself. The 1925 Chicago Cardinals were in the running to win the NFL championship from the Pottsville Maroons. The Maroons had actually beaten the Cardinals 21-7 earlier in the season at Comiskey Park. This loss gave Pottsville a half-game lead in the standings. However, the Cardinals felt they could make up for that loss. Many professional football teams during the first decade of the NFL would often schedule some easy extra games to pad their record and place in the standings. The Cardinals had hoped that the move would help bump the team to a first-place finish over Pottsville. Prior to 1933, the team with the best record in the standings at the end of the season was named the season's NFL champions. The two extra games were scheduled against the inferior Milwaukee Badgers and Hammond Pros, both of which were NFL members but had disbanded for the year. See, a lot of teams back then would also just disband on a whim. Like, they would just get to a certain point in the season and say, the hell with it, we're done. So the Badgers, who were owned by Ambrose McGurk, agreed to a game against the Cardinals. However, McGurk lived in Chicago, which put him at a disadvantage in getting his team back together to play for the Cardinals. Art Foles, a substitute quarterback for the Cardinals, convinced 4 players from Englewood High School located in Chicago into joining the Badgers for the game under assumed names, thereby ensuring the Cardinals' opponent was not a pro-caliber club. Foles himself was an Englewood High School graduate. Meanwhile, the Cardinals' owner, Chris O'Brien, unaware of the roster tampering, but still sensing a mismatch, did not charge attendance to the few scattered spectators who turned up for the December 10th, 1925 game. So this is almost 100 years ago. However, the second game on December 12th against Hammond proved to be much closer in score with a 13-0 Cardinals win over the Pros. So when it comes down to the game against the Milwaukee Badgers, the Cardinals actually won 58-0, scoring 32 points in the fourth quarter, which is pretty hilarious. So in the game, it was all Chicago scores, and wouldn't you know it, Art Foles actually scored some touchdowns. In fact, he scored 3 of them. Gee, I wonder who missed the tackles. A few weeks later, when NFL President Joseph Carr learned that high school players had been used, he told reporters the 58-0 Cardinals win would be stricken from the record. However, the league never got around to removing it. The game is still a part of the NFL records. Chris O'Brien was also fined $1,000 by Carr for allowing his team to play a game against high schoolers, even though he claimed that he was unaware of the player's status. Ambrose McGurk was ordered to sell his Milwaukee franchise within 90 days. Foles, for his role, was barred from football for life. By the summer of 1926, Carr toned down his punishment for each party involved in the scandal. Foles' lifetime ban was lifted, probably to prevent him from joining the First American Football League. However, he chose not to return to pro football. The $1,000 fine against O'Brien was rescinded, probably since the amount would have put the Cardinals out of business. And McGurk, though, had already sold his Badgers franchise to Johnny Bryan, a fullback with the Chicago Bears. The Englewood players were also forgiven, and 2 of them, William Thompson and Charles Richardson, earned high school all-star recognition at the end of the season. Foles reportedly told the high schoolers that the game was a practice game and would in no part affect their amateur status. In early December 1925, the Maroons, with a 9-2 record, were just a half game behind the Cardinals, who were 9-1-1. At the same time as the Hammond-Chicago game, the Maroons had scheduled a game against a team of Notre Dame All-Stars that included the famed Four Horsemen. Due to the public interest of the game, it was played in a larger venue, Philadelphia's Shibe Park, not Pottsville's Minersville Park, which was mainly a high school stadium. By playing in Philadelphia, the Maroons were violating territory agreements drawn up by the NFL. Philadelphia was within the boundaries already claimed as the home of the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets. The Yellow Jackets, after hearing of the planned Notre Dame contest, filed a protest with the NFL. Pottsville's owner said all along that the game was sanctioned by the NFL and that he had received permission to play in Philadelphia from an NFL secretary. However, Carr had the final say, and on several occasions, he threatened the Pottsville team with a suspension from the league if the game took place. Pottsville played the game anyway and won 9-7 on a last-minute field goal. The Maroons were fined, tossed from the league, and stripped of their title. They would also have to cancel their remaining game on their schedule against the Providence Steamroller. The team also was ruled ineligible for the league title, which was eventually awarded to the Cardinals. So basically, the Cardinals didn't even need to cheat. They just had to let Pottsville screw up. However, the Pottsville fans still demand to know why the Cardinals were awarded the title, even though they too were found by Carr to have violated the NFL's rules. According to Bob Carroll of the Pro Football Researchers Association, the Cardinals didn't defy the league quote unquote, Carroll said. Quote, Pottsville did. It was a great team, but the owner made a mistake, unquote. However, it's still not entirely known if O'Brien knew of the high school players on the Badgers team. The Pottsville team was reinstated by the NFL in July 1926, mainly because the NFL did not want to lose Pottsville's skilled group of players to the upstart American Football League. Even though the Cardinals were awarded the 1925 championship, O'Brien refused to accept it, stating that he did not want to win a title that way. However, in 1933, as Charles Bidwell took over as owner of the Cardinals, he began to claim the 1925 title belonged to the Cardinals, overturning O'Brien's earlier decision. It's also believed that a Cardinals football curse was put upon the Cardinals and Bidwell because of the events surrounding the 1925 championship. The Cardinals did, however, win the NFL championship in 1947. And there's quite a few references put in place here at the end of the article. If you want to go back and read for yourself just some of the shady shit that happened in the early NFL, hop on Wikipedia and just pick your team or just pick a season. So you can put in NFL 1921, and it'll tell the story of the season, of all the teams, anything that happened. It's really a fun little resource. I mean, obviously there's Pro Football Reference and stuff like that. That'll give you stats and shit, but if you want to get into the stories of some of the weirder shit that's happened in the game, this is the way to go. I mean, for me, it's almost always going to be Wikipedia. And you know what? While I got you guys here for a couple more minutes, I'm going to try to stretch this video out just a little bit, give you a little extra for your Thanksgiving viewing pleasure. I'm actually going to pull up probably the story of probably one of my favorite college football stories. It's a big college football weekend. You know, you got the game between Michigan and Ohio State and things like that. So, I'm going to actually pull up the story of the... Oh, this is glorious. I'm going to pull up the story of the 1916 Cumberland versus Georgia Tech football game. If some of you are longtime football fans, you might actually know of this one, but this is going to be for the ones that maybe aren't aware of it. So this happened back in October of 1916, October 7th to be exact. And it was a game played between the Cumberland College Bulldogs and the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets on the Yellow Jackets' home field of Grant Field in Atlanta. Georgia Tech defeated the Bulldogs 222-0 for the most lopsided score in the history of college football. Now, here's the thing. Cumberland had actually disbanded its football program the previous year, but it was still obligated to play this game against Georgia Tech. The Yellow Jackets head coach, John Heisman, yes, that John Heisman, the man that the trophy is named after, had been the coach of Georgia Tech's baseball team when it was defeated 22-0 by the Bulldogs earlier in 1916, and was looking to avenge that game. Heisman insisted that the Bulldogs fulfill their obligations to play the game and threaten legal action if Cumberland backed out. Cumberland tasked George E. Allen, its baseball captain, to assemble a football team for the game. He naturally recruited his frat brothers and students from Cumberland's law school to play in Atlanta. Cumberland failed to achieve a single first down in the entirety of the game. The game's infamous score can be partially attributed to 97% of the game's plays occurring in Cumberland territory, with 64 of those plays occurring in its red zone. That, for those that don't know football that well, the red zone is the area from the opponent's 20-yard line to the end zone. So it's the final 20 yards to get a touchdown. Georgia Tech, instigated by Heisman, scored on every first down it gained. The imbalance of the teams was so severe that the final 2 quarters were shortened from their customary 15 minutes to 12 minutes. This would be the last matchup of any sport between the two schools. Cumberland de-emphasized athletics in favor of academic pursuits, while Georgia Tech has continued to compete at the highest level of college sports. Current NCAA rules preclude a rematch of this game. In modern times, it is generally seen as risky to player health and unsportsmanlike to deliberately run up the score to such high numbers, meaning that college football games of 100 points or more have been infrequent since the 1940s. I mean, there's been a few 100-point games, but not a whole lot of them. I know Wisconsin got close a couple times. Hell, they got beat by 100 at one point, if I remember right. But anyway, a little bit of background here, and then I'll have a little fun and show you the scoreboard, because that's probably one of my favorite things. Cumberland College, a Presbyterian school in Lebanon, Tennessee, had discontinued its football program before the season, but was not allowed to cancel its game against the Yellow Jackets. The fact that Cumberland's baseball team had crushed Georgia Tech earlier that year, 22-0, amidst allegations that Cumberland used professionals as ringers, probably accounted for Georgia Tech coach John Heisman's running up the score on the Bulldogs. As Heisman was also Georgia Tech's baseball coach, as stated earlier. It is speculated that Heisman may have deliberately aimed for a score of exactly 222 as a numerically significant retaliation to Cumberland's 22. Another reason for Heisman's plan to run up the score was the practice among sports writers of the time to rank teams based upon how many points they scored. Excuse me. Since this statistic did not account for the strength or weakness of a team's opponent, Heisman disagreed with the amount of weight the writers tended to assign to it, and he may have unleashed his players on Cumberland to make a point. Heisman insisted on the school's scheduling agreement, which required Cumberland to pay $3,000, equivalent to $87,000 in 2024, to Tech if its football team failed to show. In fact, Heisman actually paid Cumberland $500, equivalent to $14,400 in 2024, as an incentive to play the game. His letter to Cumberland's athletic department read in part, "I hereby offer you the sum of $500 and an all-expenses-paid trip to Atlanta for your football team on the condition that you honor your contract by participating in and completing the Cumberland Georgia Tech football game. However, if this offer is refused, I shall be forced to demand that your school reimburse the Tech athletic department in the amount of $3,000 for losses from the projected net gate receipts." George Allen, who was elected to serve as Cumberland's football team student manager after first serving as the baseball team student manager, therefore put together a scrub team of 12 to 16 players, most of whom were his frat brothers or law students, to travel to Atlanta as Cumberland's football team. Now on to the game itself. Here's where it gets ugly. Cumberland received the opening kickoff and failed to make a first down. After a punt, the Yellow Jackets scored on the first play. Cumberland then fumbled on their next play from the line of scrimmage, and a Georgia Tech player returned the fumble for a touchdown. The Bulldogs fumbled again on their next play, and it took Georgia Tech 2 rushes to score its third touchdown. Cumberland lost 9 yards on its next possession, and Georgia Tech scored a fourth touchdown on another 2-play drive. Georgia Tech led 63-0 after the first quarter and 126-0 at halftime. Georgia Tech added 54 more points in the third quarter and 42 in the final period. Several players on the heavily outmatched Cumberland side suffered serious injuries during the game, including quarterback Charles Edwards, who was three times, carted off with concussions. The man got his bell rung 3 times. This was also the age of the leather helmet, just in case you forgot. Georgia Tech scored a total of 32 touchdowns, and Georgia Tech's left end, James Prius, kicked 18 extra points. Cumberland's only effective defense was an extra point blocked with a sort of human pyramid known as the climb the ladder play, topped with Vichy Woods, who suffered a gruesome facial injury on the play. I'm going to take a wild guess here and say he probably took the football off of his face. Despite scoring 32 touchdowns, the Yellow Jackets did not complete or attempt a forward pass. All their yardage came on rushes, returns, or defensive plays. Several myths have developed around the game. Some had written that Cumberland did not have a single play that gained yards. In fact, its longest play was a 10-yard pass on 4th and 22 or 3rd and 18. The Bulldogs gained positive yardage on at least 6 plays, though they fumbled on 2 of them. One page on Cumberland's website says Georgia Tech scored on every offensive play, but the play-by-play account of the game refutes this and suggests a more likely scenario that Georgia Tech scored on every one of its sets of downs. Cumberland made no first downs in the entire game. Cumberland purportedly committed 15 turnovers, 9 fumbles, and 6 interceptions during the game. Sports writer Grantland Rice wrote, Cumberland's greatest individual play of the game occurred when fullback Allen circled right end for a 6-yard loss. At halftime, Heisman reportedly told his players, "You're doing all right, team. We're ahead, but you just can't tell what those Cumberland players have up their sleeves. They may spring a surprise." They may spring a surprise. Be alert, men. Hit them clean, hit them hard. However, even Heisman relented and shortened the 3rd and 4th quarters from 15 minutes to 12. Excuse me. Good Lord. And here's a funny quote from the Atlanta Journal in 1916. As a general rule, the only thing necessary for a touchdown was to give a Tech back the ball and holler, "Here he comes," and there he goes. So, let's take a look at some stats. Cumberland had 26 rushing attempts for 922 yards and 32 touchdowns. They didn't fumble and didn't lose any fumbles. Didn't attempt or complete any passes. Did not make any field goals, nor did they attempt any. And they hit 30 of 32 extra points. Cumberland, however, 27 rushing attempts for negative 42 yards and 9 fumbles lost. Their quarterbacks were 2 of 18 for 14 yards and 6 interceptions. And of course, they didn't score. So, when you look at, the box score was just absurd. The previous records for highest score in a football game to that point had been set in 1913. 159-0 won by Newberry against BMI, and 144-0 won by the Florida Gators against Florida Southern. In the preceding 45 years of college football, only 36 games had exceeded 100 points, and only 7 of those were against teams also from a college. Since World War II, however, only a handful of schools have topped 100 points in a college football game. The modern era record for most points scored in a college against a college opponent is 106 by Fort Valley State of Georgia against Knoxville College in 1969. In the previous year, Houston defeated Tulsa 100-6 to set the NCAA record in major college football. In 1949, the University of Wyoming defeated the University of Northern Colorado 103-0. The Division III football scoring record was set in 1968 when North Park University defeated North Central College 104-32, using 10 passing touchdowns along the way. Georgia Tech's defeat of Cumberland College was so lopsided that their halftime score of 126-0 still holds significance. Had the game ended at halftime as a game today, it would still have ranked as the highest scoring collegiate football game since West Liberty State defeated Cedarville 137 to nothing on November 19th, 1932. In modern times, the last instance of a team almost scoring Georgia Tech's halftime total in a full game occurred on October 22nd, 1949, when Connecticut defeated Newport NTS 125 to nothing. The game ball had the score written on it as a memento. It was donated to the Helms Athletic Foundation Sports Museum by Bill Schrader, an avid sports collector. When the museum moved in the 1980s, the ball was boxed and remained in storage. In 2014, Ryan Schneider, a Georgia Tech alumnus, purchased the ball in a charity auction for $40,000 and $40,388, $33,657 without buyer's premium, with the intention of donating it back to Georgia Tech. In October 1956, a 40th reunion was held for players from both teams, of whom 28 attended. While reminiscing, one of the Cumberland players pointed out one play that saved Cumberland from an even worse defeat. Had Cumberland punted as normal instead of running a sneak, the score would probably have been 229 to nothing. While Cumberland's football team would eventually be restarted full-time and change its nickname to the Phoenix in 2016, the two schools have not met in any sports since. Cumberland would eventually de-emphasize athletics and currently competes in the NAIA, while Georgia Tech would go on to be a founding member of the Southeastern Conference before departing the SEC in 1964, and is currently a member of the Atlantic Coast Conference, otherwise known as the ACC. In any case, current NCAA rules only allow Division III schools to compete against NAIA schools. So, with that being said, let me get back here to the original picture of the scoreboard, because I just love this. So hopefully you guys will see this. Yep, right there. So, yeah. Just a little bit of extra football content for you guys on this Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it for you guys. Again, at the very least, I will be here with you Friday night, 7:30-ish, and we will have Thanksgiving side dish discussions. I think that's what it is anyway. That'd be for the Mount Rushmore. I will probably do a NFL predictions thread for the remaining games of this coming Sunday, because we'll probably be in the midst of the Eagles-Bears game at airtime, and there will have been 3 games played on Sunday, which we're not going to predict for that. Although if I were, I'd probably take the Packers over the Lions. I would take not Chicago, because Chicago's not playing, but I'd probably take maybe the Cowboys, whoever they're playing, I don't remember. And then I think Cincinnati and Baltimore is the nightcap. I would probably take Baltimore. But that's not going to be the official predictions. But yeah, I'm sure I'll find something crazy for Spooky Talk. I might pull a story from one of my other Haunted Wisconsin books, just to see if there's anything that we haven't covered yet. Because I think the goal is going to be once we cover all of the haunted stories of Wisconsin, all the paranormal stories of Wisconsin, we're probably going to move on to doing maybe Minnesota or Illinois. I don't know which yet, but that's kind of what I'm thinking. But yeah, thanks for jumping on and watching as I fumbled and coughed my way through this whole thing. Hope you enjoyed it. And like I said, be right back here on Friday, 7:30. And for anybody watching this before or during Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving from those of us at the Widiots. And who knows, maybe we'll get Kevin back on Friday. I don't know at this point, but we'll figure it out. In the meantime, in between time, peace and love. We'll see you on Friday.